I think,
I don't mind taking questions now.
yeah, and I'm sure that Martyn would be able to talk about the production of the film. And coming from KK's sort of presentation, talking about the spaces and what it was like, perhaps you could, talk a little bit about your experience on site and in production, what it was like, maybe to enlighten those of us here.
I think the film took about 3 weeks to shoot, and I was only on set maybe like 2 or 3 days, yeah, when I was free. Remember I was at the coffee shop, I think where probably this scene was shot. Um, well, it was a very small crew. Everyone had fun. Everyone knew each other. We didn't attempt to make this any kind of a political statement or any kind of historical statement. We just wanted to have fun. Eric had film stock, which he won in the previous International Film Festival short film. So he had a bunch of Kodak film stock, and he thought, why not use it and make it a feature-length film. And, and, and he got us together um, to come together and try to make it happen. Yeah.
Could you maybe fill us in on, what about how it was, what the process of filming, was like?
Well, the script started from this man called Damien Sin, whom in the film itself was credited as Fong Yulei. Because at the time, I think it was because he was about to join MediaCorp as a scriptwriter. And also he was writing these ghost stories for the Singapore horror ghost stories, Damien Sin. I think because of contractual issues, he didn't have permission to use Damien Sin as a credit. So the idea came out of a short story which he wrote sometime before the film was made, and Eric read that short story. It's a story about necrophilia. So Eric thought it was such a brilliant idea, and then they spoke and decided to expand it into a feature-length script. And back in the early 1990s, a lot of us, some of us, were starting to get into serious cinema watching, European art house cinema. Me, I was very much into Taiwanese, Ho Xiaoxians and stuff like that. So it was not so much a reactionary against what was going on in TV at the time. It was more like because we were just influenced by this stuff. So there was no way we were going to make a happy Jack Newell type of film. We were interested in sex. We were interested in drugs. We were interested in prostitutes. We were interested in the dark side of life. And then we were in Singapore, and then all this, and then there were nightclubs that we went to, and then we saw all these ideas start gelling at the end. And that's how Mee Pok Man came to be made. And it was made with the help of a lot of beer and a lot of nightly beer sessions at Newton Hawker Center. And we spent a lot of time in Eric's basement in his house, right behind Goodwood Park Hotel then, just drinking whiskey and just coming up with ideas. Yeah, it's just a bunch of young, early 20-somethings. Eric was probably one of the first generation of Singaporeans who did overseas film studies, and came back and he made a few short films, won a few competition, and got some money. And so all of us met through this magazine called Big O Magazine, which was a very important music magazine throughout the late 80s and 90s, covering local music. Eric was drawing cartoons for them, not the sort of superhero cartoons, but real life cartoons of people with real life stories and dark stories. And I was writing music reviews, covering local bands. And Joe was a musician already. He was trying to get his band going. And George, who played Michelle's younger brother, was also writing for his own music magazine, and he's also in the band. And then you see a little bit of Chris Ho at the barber shop. So all these people were very instrumental in the local music scene back then. And we were influenced by like I said, all the art, cinema, and all that. So it's coming together of all these elements that Mee Pok Man happened. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so now that you guys have like watched the film, I'm just wondering if you had any questions for Martyn, maybe about the film itself or about its production in any way, any sort of, burning question that you wanted to, yeah. So please feel free to just put up your hands and we'll pass the mic around. Or in any case, for Alan or KK as well, on any questions that, what they have presented. So it's actually quite a good panel because you've looked at the production of it, the I suppose the representation, as Alan put, is the body, and as of spaces in Singapore. So I'm just wondering if you have any questions at all? Okay, don't be shy. Maybe I'll start the ball rolling a little bit. KK made a statement just now about how film sort of anchors us in terms of our history and heritage. And, being in the archive, this is exactly what we do. So I'm just wondering, KK, looking at just the title of this panel, at the legacy and impact, what would you say would be Mee Pok Man's impact for the Singapore film industry or even for our sort of cultural landscape in that sense?
I think it really heralded the birth of national cinema in Singapore. We know that there was a golden age in Singapore cinema in the 50s and 60s, but that was more of like transnational cinema, more Malayan in nature, and I would call Mee Pok Man the film that heralded, the HDB genre of cinema. So after that, you have like 12-story, money no enough, whatever enough, and very much anchored into public housing existence, spatially and imaginatively as well. And this is where national cinema has been quite anchored in this narrative so far. And he has won awards too, not just Mee Pok Man, but also Anthony Chan's Liew. So I think that's the kind of fascination in public housing living that urban planners may have missed. That it goes beyond the kind of pride that 90% are housed in safe and very clean environment. So I think it offers a very intimate and vivid imagination of how life is being really lived in Singapore.
Yeah.
So you talked about, and I think one of the biggest things for me looking through your very, very fascinating pictures was that it was always about space and not about place, places with actual histories. And if you talk about Eric Khoo's films, like you have the Heartlands featured, yes, it's true, but they are nameless places. It's just a kind of a trope. You just, okay, so this is some poor people living in the heartlands, and that's enough for you. That's a shot I need. I don't really need to talk about the historicity or the history or the memories related to that actual place. As long as it's a bloody HDB, that's fine. I've done my bit with the story. So I even today, I feel like with a lot of our artists, and even when you talk about Ilo and things like that, heartlands, HDBs are very much a kind of artistic trope, and they are not really developed much further than being that. How do you feel about that?
I do agree with you, Alan. I think, Martyn, you probably feel that, when they're doing the production, right, they were not really interested in looking at the history of Outram, They just thought that, this is a really gritty space, Spooner Road as well. Yeah. And the other void decks, let's assemble. And Martyn, I think, did a wonderful job in assembling everything together to make you feel that it was actually in one HDB estate, nameless estate. And I think Alan made a very good point. But so I guess this is my job as a kind of a film studies person to actually give, put an addition to it, to give it a meaning, a name, that it's not just a horrid estate. It's called Spooner Road. It's called Outram. It had wonderful days before. And I guess this is how we continuously give a text a meaning. Because I don't think the directors and the editors were actually aware. Right? Martyn, I don't think you bothered, right? But I think this is probably what we can do as historians, archivists, and scholars, and even interested people, because they have actually given this very invaluable resource for us to look at. And I think Karen has also been doing a wonderful job there.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when you ask, people know where Buntad Road is? And you can say everybody's, no, at least those that I saw, they were shaking their heads. So there are lots of places in Singapore that are actually somewhat unknown in some place, in some ways. So I'm just wondering, given that, well, the majority of you wouldn't, probably this would be the first time you see Mee Pok Man, would it be? Yeah? What did you think of it? And you may, perhaps, given your generation of, watching it from your perspective, did you have any questions, anything that jumped out from the panel discussion that appeared, sort of spoke to you in some way? Like watching it from what your sort of understanding of Singapore? Yeah, Luca. Yeah. Hang on a minute, just let's get the mic so everyone can hear.
Hello.
Yeah.
I have a question in relation to sound and the voice. There are instances in the film where, with the sense that, for instance, the two main characters are the interior space is very inaccessible, and things speak in proxy for them. So, for instance, there's that radio voice over the suicidal boy that sort of, in a way, becomes a way of commenting the atmosphere of the Mee Pok Man's headspace. And then there's also the diary and the voiceover. And I'm interested in the significance in that that displacement of the voice and that sort of, and its relation to the body as well, and maybe in relation to just the space of the film. Like, I'm interested in hearing all three of your perspectives. Thanks.
The radio is basically to denote a period of time in Singapore at that time where people talk about their life stories on air. And also the suicide story, just to give a hint of life, of the other side of life in Singapore where there are suicidal people. And then the Bunny's voiceover is very important because we added that in because we felt Bunny's character was so flat. So the voiceover gave her a three-dimensional characterization to her. Was it added on later? No, it wasn't added on it was added on later in the script, but not added on later in post-production. Yeah, and I mean, if the film is, and the film cannot be accused of sexist because really the only character in the film that has full three-dimensional characterization is really Bunny. Yeah, you actually know her past, a little bit of her past, and where she wants to go in the future. She wants to migrate with the Ang Mo guy and everything. So everyone else is just pimps and gangsters. And yeah, so no one comes out of this film as a savory character. Everyone is just low life. Yeah, so the use of audio is also to replace obvious shots like establishing shots. It's a device that's often used in films to just give the viewer a little bit of idea of what's the context in which these characters exist, and also to give depth to the characters. Yeah.
Alan, did you have anything to add?
I have nothing intelligent to say.
Okay. I suppose KK wouldn't have anything
maybe
to
I
add?
just want to add about voiceover, or maybe just go to soundtrack. The opening song that you hear in Mee Pok Man, when people are just eating non-stop, very cannibalistic culture, was from Opposition Party, one of the first punk groups in Singapore that came about in the 1980s. So this is where I think the Mee Pok Man is not just a film. It's actually a convergence of different kinds of cultural platforms, music, comics, film, as well as even magazines. Big O was one of the very important platforms in the 90s in which we bring all these different forces together, including Martyn himself has been very much involved.
I mean, you have music and you have music, right? I mean, the pop music in those days were just pop music, but we're not interested in that. For me, it just doesn't give me any pleasure listening to pop music on the radio. So I was into Velvet Underground. I was into all the punk stuff. I was into the post-punk stuff. I was into American indie. And guess what? People like Joe and Eric was into the same music, and they were into the same kind of films that I like. you know, the Jim Jarmusch and the Kieslowski and the Hosiausians. So we all came together and we all started writing for this big old magazine. And at the same time, the editor of Big Old Magazine runs the Singapore International Film Festival, and he was a big supporter of independent cinema. And Eric, by that time, he already won 2 or 3 awards for his short films, and he's made some money in some film stock. And so we just decided over beer at Newton one day, or is it Newton, or maybe in his basement, drunk one day, hey, let's just try to make a feature film out of this. And at that time, I just joined the industry as an editor. So everything came together quite nicely. It's like a band being formed with the bassist and the drummer and the guitarist. And Joe was so game to act, you know, even though he has absolutely 0 acting experience. This was probably his first and last acting role. And I always say that it's not an easy role to play. I mean, which actor in the world can play this dumb hawker guy who's madly in love with this prostitute, but who can't string a proper sentence together, you know? And the only chance that he gets to love her is when she's almost dying. So it's a very difficult role to play. I think Joe pulled it off in his own esoteric way. So I think, yeah, kudos to him and to everyone involved. I mean, it was a very small crew. I don't think, even today I haven't got paid for this yet. I should remind Eric. But, you know, we cobbled the crew together based on just connections and what people, of who was willing to get paid that amount. And many of the locations we got only because they were available and we didn't have to ask permission, and the cameraman felt that, oh, the lighting there looks quite nice. You know, it just fills in the overall mood of the film. So it's quite nice to hear historians and archivists talking about it 20 years later and giving it extra dimension to the film, when really it wasn't there before, just a bunch of drunk guys, you know, trying to make art.
Okay, yes, we have 2 questions of that.
I think one of the things I find really interesting is the use of different dialect and language in the same scenes. So I want to understand how the script was developed, or it's more spontaneous and it's just that you happen to speak different dialects. And
Yeah, Damien Sin is an English-educated guy. He's a very widely read person. But at the same time, he's also a junkie. So he was at the time, he was in and out of the drug rehab. So he meets a lot of these characters. And he's also quite fluent in his dialects. So for us to not use dialect is just impossible. We hear it all the time, and it's the language of Singaporeans. So it's to think that we would make a film using Mandarin. Remember, this was early 1990s. This big Mandarin campaign was still huge. So we didn't give a damn. It was just more realistic, and we tried to make Ketong speak some Hokkien because he's Peranakan. His second language is Malay. So in the end, we gave out. I just have him have few speaking lines and all that. Yeah, that was the reason why we use dialect.